welcome back in to the 411 on Wrestling podcast. I'm your host, Blake Lovell. With me is, once again, Steve Cook, back to discuss our favorite documentary series going on right now, Dark Side of the Ring. And we're also going to discuss the WWE on A&E biographies, which continue with the most recent one being Shawn Michaels. And now that I have finally caught up to all these, I know Steve has been watching them pretty regularly as they've happened, but I have finally gotten caught up. But Steve, we're also going to dive into the ultra violence of Nick Gage, which was the most recent Dark Side of the Ring episode. Again, as we did on the last podcast, I'll just ask you a pretty straight up question to start with. What did you think of the Nick Gage episode?
Well, if you don't know about the Nick Gage story, it's a very interesting one.
To say the least.
Nick Gage has had a very interesting career. He's had a lot of ups and downs, to certainly say the least. And it's interesting because I know there are some people out there who really didn't want to give it a chance, because there's a certain segment of the population out there that doesn't have much use for deathmatch wrestling, and I can understand why. I know there's a lot of negatives surrounding the whole scene, but to me, I've always kind of thought of pro wrestling as being one big open tent. And especially if you're going to welcome zombies into your life, you might as well welcome deathmatch wrestlers into your life as well. So it's a story that I know pretty well, because I'm not like a regular CZW watcher, but I did watch a lot of CZW later on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I watched a lot of shows in later years. I'll say that without talking about how I got my hands on those shows. But so I've seen a lot of Nick Gage, and I've followed his career a bit, and we know how he went away for a while, and then he came back, and they went to great detail on all that. But the story, the thing about the show overall, and I enjoy the show overall. It's about a guy who went through some pretty bad shit, but he's come out the other side, and so far he's doing okay, which I think is a nice story. And we'll have to wait and see where that goes. But it's interesting because, a few years back, I don't think you go back a few years, I don't think anybody thinks that Nick Gage would be one of the most talked about people in indie wrestling. And he is that. I mean, he's a top draw in the indies. And when we get, regular shows back again, he'll be a big part of that, because he had an injury, but I think he's back on the most recent GCW shows and all that. So, the guy still got a lot in front of him.
Yeah, I thought that the start and the finish were the two. Like, this is, if you're gonna do a documentary, I think those are always, a very important part of sort of how do you start it, how do you finish it. And one of the things that I kind of looked at was like, all right, I thought they did an awesome job, like with the intro, because like you're immediately, like you said, if you're someone, let's say you've never seen Nick Gage wrestle, like you have no idea, you've heard this guy is this guy who does all these crazy death matches and everything, you have no idea, and you're just casually turning to the channel to say, let's see what this is all about. Well, like they immediately just give you all this footage, like you immediately are introduced to him within the first minute, and you're seeing all of these, him bleeding out and all this other stuff. And so I thought they did a really good job with that. And then we're obviously going to talk about a lot of the stuff in the middle, but like at the end with him basically saying, hey, I'm going to probably die young. Like, I just sort of know, like, given everything I've been through, like, everything going on, and, like, it's just, like, that full circle type thing. Like you said, this guy has come out on the other side, but just, I thought that was pretty glaring, too, just sort of with his overall thoughts on where he's at this point. So I thought they did a really good job with that, because, again, I think those are always two hard things to nail when you do like something like with a documentary or even anything like creatively. It's just how do you start and how do you finish? And I thought they sort of tied everything together. And like I said, I know we'll get to the stuff in the middle, but I really thought that they pretty much encapsulated everything sort of with the intro and the ending to it.
You notice that they didn't have as many talking heads on this show as they do for most of these shows. You did not hear the contributions of Jim Ross or Jim Cornette or Dave Meltzer. They were nowhere to be seen on this show, because they couldn't tell you a whole lot about Nick Gage. But you did have, Gage spoke very well for himself. Gage has a certain charisma about him, which is kind of strange, and people really liked that about him. And his girlfriend was on there, Sandra, and then you had the GCW promoter Brett Lauderdale, and of course everybody's favorite hardcore legend, everybody's favorite crazy wrestler John Moxley was on there, and he and Gage have quite the history. And I thought he had some illuminating things to say as well.
I thought it was smart to kind of start, with the Moxley thing and going back to, him cutting him with the pizza cutter and all that stuff. And I really like you said, there was not a lot of people like commenting on this. Like it was, and I thought that was important too. Was like they mainly turned the focus here to which you can't do with all these, like because unfortunately some of these people have passed away. A lot, some of the subjects that you're doing these documentaries on are no longer with us. And so when you have that opportunity, to do that with a story like this, because it is different, because this guy is seemingly gone from the really, really dark side to coming out on the other side for now. I think it's important, just to make him front and center. And I thought they did a really good job with that. They didn't rely on all the talking heads, like you said, where you have to do that in some of these situations, just given the circumstances. But starting with Moxley, that adds, an element to it to where obviously there are a lot of John Moxley fans out there, whether WWE, AEW, doesn't matter. But I just thought it was really, to add that touch early on was important too. And like you said, you just go through all the different things and, basically starting with the tournament of death stuff and explaining what that is. And, Brett Lauderdale is recalling the match, with Thumbtack Jack and all this. And I think just, that to me is probably of all the stuff in it, aside from the David Arquette stuff, which I know we'll get into, but just the actual having the video footage of what happened in that match, like with him, bleeding out and like he's in back there and he's looking into the camera and basically saying, "Hey, just tape it up. I'm headed back out."
He was
Like,
going back to the ring, damn it.
like that. That's one of the things, like they said early on too. Is like
While his intestines were coming out, he's like, I'm going back, damn it.
I don't remember who said it, but one of those was it Moxley or maybe it was Gage. I don't know, but it was like, you're never going to accuse these dudes of doing this for the money. And that was certainly, it wasn't going to get any more real than that with that footage of that tournament of death match with him back there saying, just tape up my intestines. I'll head back out there and finish this thing.
Such a weird scene. They did his tournament to death, of course, out in the middle of nowhere in Delaware. I believe that's DJ Hyde's parents' yard is where they do that, basically.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, that's Mr. and Mrs. Markland. That's where they have their tournament of death every year. And apparently it's way far out in the middle of nowhere, so they had to get the helicopter come in and take him out. And pretty scary situation for Gage. And with stuff like that, and with with various stuff, you can they did a good job of showing how things were going wrong for Nick, how he was heading down that road. The issues with his brother, which I recall that famous match where him and Justice Pain, of course, his brother, they had this match, and they kind of always had a testy relationship anyway. And Nick admits on the show that he was a little bit messed up going into the match. So Justice Pain not having any of it, just drops him on his head, ends the match in like 5 minutes, which leads to a whole different thing where they didn't cover any of this on the show because it didn't really affect Nick, obviously. But everybody's favorite NXT referee now, Drake Wirtz, that
Right.
guy, everybody's favorite guy nowadays. Yeah, after the Justice Pain Nick Gage match, Zandig decides to send him out. He sends Drake out there to wrestle Justice Pain and attempt to save the show. And it wound up being like something that kind of catapulted Drake into stardom there in CZW. So in a way, Nick Page getting screwed up gave us Drake Wirtz in WWE.
What a we've
So yeah. So there you go. There you go. We can blame Nick Gage now for the existence of Drake Wirtz.
what a strange world wrestling is. And like you said, there's a lot of connections that you don't ever really put together until you really dive into it. But yeah, I mean, you talk about like the helicopter thing. What was it they said that he had? I guess it's the famous story. Like he had flatlined for 7 minutes in the helicopter after that tournament of death.
He was zombie Nick Gage. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I mean, like you
He
said,
could have been that. He could have been on Backlash.
yeah, for WrestleMania Backlash, that is.
Yes.
Not Backlash traditional, because that doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, I mean, like just nuts. Like this whole story, and you brought up like and the brother thing. I mean, I don't even know. And we brought up like that's one of the things too. Like Gage was talking about how his brother jumps off the bridge after the cops are chasing him and all that, and then he adds in the element, like again, which for me, I mean, I didn't realize this, and I'm sure a lot of people watching had no idea if you just talk about like location. But he's like, oh yeah, like the bridge is right behind my house, so like when I walk out, like I just have to basically stare at that. And it's
That
like, my
that's gotta be awkward.
goodness, right?
Like,
Like
dude,
you think
move,
about it, like
move.
unbelievable, man.
Like,
This
dude,
guy
I
just,
think you got moved, don't you?
yeah, like that's what I was thinking. I'm like, you think about all this stuff this guy's been through, and that's one of those things too, where it's like, you just think about everything he's been to just to that point. Like that's the, that's the last part of this documentary is going into that, and it's like he's sitting there, and it's sort of just you can tell it affects him, but it's almost like after everything this guy's been through, like, having to walk out the behind his house and like see the bridge that his brother, jumped off of and died on, it's like, my goodness, like this guy, it's just one thing after another, it seemed like. But you know what? Again, like this guy is just sort of, I don't know, he is one of those figures, and it's like you said earlier, you talk about the connection and all that stuff like he has with the fans, and he's going into like in the documentary he's talking about getting all the fan mail, and even Moxley saying that Vince would kill to have someone like Nick Gage who can connect with the fans. And then I'm just thinking, like,
I disagree. I don't
I
think
don't
Vince
agree with
wants
that
guys
either.
like that.
I
No,
think
I
that's sort of
disagree with Moxley
extreme,
100%.
but
Vince does not want guys like that.
no, I think that again, Moxley probably worded it could have worded it a little bit better, I think, overall, and how he said that. But like I'm just thinking, I'm like, that is wrestling though. Like when you think about a guy like this who draws that kind of passion and sort of connection from fans, like that's a big part of just the entire professional wrestling realm, whether you're talking about regular traditional wrestling or like deathmatch wrestling. And it's just like you think about all that he's like, the connection he's built with all these people, it's incredible to think about that.
The thing about, of course, his brother Justice Payne, we mentioned earlier where he had the match with Nick, but if you go back to the early days of CZW, they both broke in there, obviously, and Justice Payne he was the older brother, and Nick kind of grew up in his shadow there in CZW. Xander kind of saw Justice Payne as the big star, and for part of his career, at least, Justice Payne had the better physique. He had a good store bought physique going for him. There might have been some wellness policy issues there going on. I'm not sure, but the guy had a good body, is what I'm getting at. And he was on top of it, CCW for a long time. And then once he started fading away is when Nick kind of started to break out. But then also by that point, Nick had already fallen deep into his issues brought about by various deathmatch wrestling and the things he was doing to himself. And there was some a little bit of drug usage going on there, just a little bit. But yeah, Justice Payne fades away, and he goes. You figure, I think Miss just figured like he just kind of moved on, and it seemed like he was kind of the normal one, I guess. But then no, he's the one that ends up going crazy in the end.
Yeah. Well, and you just think too, like, Gage talked about like losing his mom to cancer and basically how he just didn't care after that. And, he had, even before that, like he had gotten hooked on the painkillers and the drugs and all this other stuff. And it's just like, again, like we go back to like, we're talking about all these different things that have happened to this guy at various points. And it is incredible to think that, like we said in the beginning, somehow, at least for right now, like this guy has come out in a spot that you probably would have never imagined for him to be in at this point in his life, just based on every single thing that has seemingly happened in all these various points throughout that have been, like we said, in some cases, very tragic situations. Other cases, of his own doing with some of the stuff. It's just like, I don't even know. Like I just, that just blows my mind as you watch this entire hour. Is like, how is this guy sitting in front of this camera right now talking? Like, how is that even possible? Just based on some of the stuff that he's been through, and just everything in between. It's just unreal.
And people talk about Gage and people like that, and and you wonder like, oh well, the guy robbed a bank. How can you support a guy like that who is addicted to drugs and robs banks and things like that? But I think the reason Gage does get support is because he's upfront about it. Gage,
Yeah.
he didn't make any excuses. He came out and he said what he did, and went to jail, did his time, and I guess the phrase that kind of cliche is, he paid his debt to society, but he pretty much did pay his debt to society.
Yeah. Well, and I was just watching the Booker T, like Booker T, what robbed the Wendy's 26 times, I think, or whatever it was.
26 Wendy's, like my God. But yeah, the same deal. Booker T paid. He went to jail, and both Gage and Booker went to jail, and they came out better on their side for experience. Booker educated himself and got into good shape. And Gage got into he's great. Gage pretty much trained for the first time in his life. Pretty much what
Yeah.
happened there.
Yeah, well, that was a big part of it too. Was like talking about the, you know, the bank robbery and everything, and we talked about that on the previous episode, and we were kind of giving our thoughts on what we would expect. But the Moxley comment on him, you know, wearing the always having his face covered when he goes out to the ring, but then when he robs a bank, you know, he does it without a mask. And I'll tell you one thing that really stood out to this whole thing. if if you're going to be Nick Gage and have all this stuff happen and have all these issues at times throughout your entire life and career, you want Sandra with you because she, I
She's
mean,
ride or die.
that's exactly what I put down in my notes. I'm like, that is the only phrase to describe this. She is ride or die, and that's it. I mean, she said it. It was one of the things she was talking about. You know, she was talking about her concerns. You know, when he got lit on fire and all that stuff. But then, you know, she basically just goes into it like, I'm gonna be there for him no matter what. I don't care what he does, what he's doing. Like, I'm there for him, and I'm just like, respect. Like, wow, like that's probably not easy to do when you think about sort of the
No,
lifestyle that he's had. So
no, that's a tough thing. And you gotta give similar credit in that vein to Brett Lauderdale, a guy who
yeah,
started out as a referee with CZW and worked his way up the ranks and was Nick pretty much the only guy in that scene that kind of stuck by Nick Gage through thick or thin. Like a lot of the other CZW guys, like even Justice Payne had nothing to do with Nick Gage when Nick Gage was going to jail and all that. But Lauderdale is pretty much the one guy who stuck by Nick Gage throughout everything. And Gage took advantage of that trust sometimes too. But Lauderdale is just there for the guy. And we say a lot of the bad things about wrestling promoters, and a lot of wrestling promoters are they can be kind of shady at times, if you will. But judging from what he's been with Nick Gage, I mean, Brett Lauderdale might be one guy that's actually a fine, reputable wrestling promoter, even if he does death matches.
yeah, and you know, where would he be without those two people, right? Without the girlfriend and without Brett Lauderdale, like there's no telling like how this would have ended up at this point. And I had to chuckle when Lauderdale's retelling the story of he's like he calls Gage or whatever, and he's like, hey, when are you gonna turn yourself in? And finally Gage calls him. And then he's like, well, what did you do after that? And it's like, well, took him to Burger King, got a Whopper. He had a drink and a smoke, and then he turned himself in. I'm just like, what would I like in that situation? I don't think I'd probably just be sitting back, relaxed and probably grabbing a Whopper. But it's the way Lauderdale told the story. I was just like, my goodness. But that was the guy's mindset, and clearly Nick
Yeah,
Gage is, I mean, that's his mindset, right? He doesn't fear
Gage
anything.
is just gonna go to Atlantic City and spend all that money, and then he was gonna go to jail.
Yeah, like
That was the plan there, apparently.
that was the extent of the plan. It seemed like at that point, and then then things really go into the David Arquette portion, which I'm sure even if you're not someone who watched a lot of Nick Gage matches in the past or even knew anything about sort of the history there or anything. You've heard about the David Arquette thing, and I think that the fact that they had Arquette on here, like that was another thing, and that's what I gotta, Dark Side of the Ring, man. You have got they. I'm not saying they're perfect, but like they understand the value of telling the entire story and trying to do it from every angle possible. And so I think the fact that they got Arquette for this, like that's another one. It's just like
That's
that,
surprising.
it is like it is. It was very. I was like, wait a second, like they're actually got this guy, and to give his side of the story, and to even like have the TMZ footage after, like all that stuff. That just adds another element to this kind of stuff, and I mean that was just what a wild story that was. Like with Arquette, and like when you see him, cut his neck and all this other stuff, and Gage is like, I kept thinking of this. And I was like, I'm trying not to laugh because none of this stuff's funny, but it's the way Gage says this stuff. Like it's just his personality, where he's like, oh, I've been through enough matches. I could tell it's just some blood spewing out. Like I could tell it wasn't an artery or anything. So
It's not funny, but it's still kind of funny.
yeah, like that's what I did. I caught myself. I'm like, wait a second, should I be laughing at this? But I'm like, it is just the way Gage tells it. It's like,
Yeah, and he didn't die, so
no, that's what he said. He's like, oh, I knew he was okay. Like I'd seen guys before. I realized, it's just a little blood spewing out, but it wasn't like an artery or anything. I'm just like, holy shit. So that was quite a story there with Arquette.
there's a, I mean, there's a, Oh man, it's there's a thin line there between bravery and stupidity,
Yeah.
and David Arquette was somewhere on that line there. I'm not sure which side it is there. I mean, I guess you didn't know a lot about Nick Gage going into it, but at the same time, it's like you kind of had to expect that something like that was going to happen.
Well,
I
and
mean, certainly anybody who, if you asked any wrestling, pseudo expert out there who heard that there's going to be a match between Nick Gage and David Arquette, yeah, I think they all have said, yeah, something like that is going to happen.
he could have asked anyone, right? Like
Yeah.
literally anyone before. And like you said, I almost looked at that and I was like, but one of the things that Arquette said that I was like, I guess it sort of makes sense. And although he probably didn't realize to this extent what he was getting himself into, like you still feel that like Arquette, and I think they did a good job with this because I think it's something that I've thought about before, but once they actually put him on there speaking of it, you're like, oh yeah, well I guess I could see that. Like he's basically talking about how everyone just turned on him, when he won the WCW title. And
Uh-huh.
like he sort of, you could tell in his voice, like he just had that edge where he's like, I'm pissed off that these people were so mad at me for winning this title. And he's like, I want to prove them wrong. And I feel like that's been such a big part of his, I don't even know if resurgence is the word, but you know,
There's the
you know,
impetus for his whole comeback, pretty much.
yeah, exactly.
And it was always kind of BS too, to be honest with you. David Arquette didn't deserve the heat for all that.
Right.
That was a dumb idea from bad creative.
Yeah.
And maybe David Arquette could have said no or whatever, but no, he was there for the payday to help promote the movie. He was going to do whatever they asked him to, and he donated the money that he made off of it to wrestlers, dead wrestler families.
Yeah. I thought that was,
So he never deserved any heat for that in my book. That's lame.
yeah, it,
It's a
it
bad
did.
idea. It's a
Right.
terrible, horrible, atrocious booking idea, sure, but don't blame David Arquette. Good lord.
No, it did. It felt like it fueled his comeback, like to that level. And I don't know. I keep thinking, I'm like, did he really not have any idea of what he was gonna find him? No, I mean, like it
Could have
wasn't
typed
just
in the Google machine or a YouTube video or something. Man,
like, but still, even if you don't even know who Nick Gage is, it's like you're wrestling in a death match. Like you've got to have some idea of what that is. Like if I'm just someone on the street and someone walks up to me and says you're wrestling in a death match, my first question is going to be, okay, hold on a second. What does that mean? Like, what is a death match? Because I can understand if you just want me to have a match, but like a death match, that sounds a little extreme. So
they're in death and it's not good. And let's be honest. If it wasn't Nick Gage in this death match, any wrestler in a death match with David Arquette is gonna try to pull something.
yeah, that's
Let's
true.
be honest. It could have been any deathmatch wrestler you want to throw in there. It wasn't just because Nick Gage is Nick Gage. Pretty much, you can throw anybody else, Necro Butcher or any of the Danny Havoc or any of the guys you want to throw in there. There would have been something similar to that would have
because
happened.
they know how many eyeballs are going to be on them for just I mean I think that's a big like and it's like you're going to get some publicity out of something like
Yep.
that and you're going to have more eyeballs on you than probably ever before because you're wrestling a celebrity and yeah like I completely agree with that like
You'll
this
get over with the wrestling fans too
yep
because most of them hate David Arquette. So no matter what you do, people they'll probably support you.
Yep, that's a good point too. Like that is a very good point. So yeah, that's probably something that a lot of people didn't think about, but that's a great point on that. I mean, I guess overall in the Nick Cage film, like I said, I thought it was really well done. I am not someone that is actively over the years sought out Nick Gage matches or death matches and such. But like, I'm probably like most people. If there's something that I hear or something that catches my eye, I'm like, all right, well, I need to check this out or that out. But but there are like and you saw it in this. Like again, you go back to the he's talking about getting all this fan mail in jail, and you
Yeah.
just like the crowds, right? Like that's just I don't know. Like that is something that I don't think you can sort of for him. I mean, the more I think about it, it's like that's what drives him at this point. Like to do everything that he does. Like he realizes, that is what we talk about with all of wrestling. It's like that crowd. And of course, we've had that conversation over the past year or so, just based on the situation and everything. But like I can only imagine for someone like that, the drive and what you get out of just like realizing like you have created, this I mean like monster's not the right word, but it's sort of like you have created this following and connection to where if you're going to put yourself through this hell like every single match, it's like you better have someone out there that cares. And my God, he's got people that care. So
Well, back when GCW had that collective weekend back in Indianapolis back last year, and right in the middle of COVID, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and all the eyeballs were on it. And of course, the one time that everybody was noticing that everybody's getting together without masks was during the Nick Gage entrance,
right.
because they all wanted to run up and slap high fives with that guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I just think that it was. I thought that this was going to be one where, again, I'm sure there are people that didn't love it because there's probably people who just are not going to pay any attention or care anything about this sort of style of wrestling or anything like that. But he is such an interesting figure, I think, just in terms of certainly his entire story. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But just, I also think like what he has done just for certainly that type of wrestling as well, but just the connection with the fans, I think is just something that, man, it is, it's pretty, so it's pretty incredible just to sort of think about that connection that's been built there. And like you said, for him to be out on the other side at this point, it's probably the biggest, accomplishment more than anything, just based on everything that's happened in his life. But I don't know if Steve you saw this. Of course, this is not necessarily documentary specific, but they're obviously setting up something where he wants to have the match with Moxley. But he also said in an interview that's with someone. I'm trying to remember who it was, but he said he wanted a death match with none other than Kenny Omega. Do you see a Nick Gage versus Kenny Omega death match happening anytime in the future?
Well, it depends if I'm not sure if Gage is currently the GCW heavyweight champion, but we know that Kenny Omega is a man that's out there to collect belts.
He wants
He
them
is the
all.
belt collector. So what if, in fact, Kenny Omega was to make an appearance for GCW, take on Nick Gage for that championship? I mean, it's not completely out of the equation. And let's be honest, if you've noticed the type of people that Tony Khan likes to bring in, there are a lot of people from that 2000s era, late 2000s CZW that you'll see tooling around AEW because, a lot of people like the Ring of Honor, but let's face it, Tony Khan was a CZW guy.
Yeah.
That's what he was watching. He was all about the death matches and all that ultra violent stuff. And he would love to bring in Nick Gage. I have no doubt in my mind that Tony Khan would be all about bringing in Nick Gage if they could make that happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it was actually he had the interview with Ron Funches, and that's one of the things he talked about was AEW's exploding barbed wire death match. And that's when he mentioned he wanted a match with Omega. He had basically said, well, that AEW's death match didn't go very well, and he didn't really like the match and all that. But again,
I mean,
comparing,
you could plop Gage right in that. I mean, I know it's Moxley versus Gage right now, but you could plop him in that group with Gage, Moxley, and Kingston. That makes sense.
yeah, and I think did they have some of the footage of Kingston in the Dark Side episode? I think I saw him in there.
He was in there. Yeah, he
Yeah,
was in there. He's in what is part of the deathmatch stuff.
yeah.
Eddie was a part of that scene too. I mean, that's not all Eddie is known for, but he had his time in tour in CW where he did some stuff.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like you said, it's some people probably are like, why are they, spending this much time on this match? It's never going to happen. But the more I think about it, I'm like, I don't know. We are in such a weird time in wrestling right now where it's like, I
Can't
don't
rule it out. You cannot
know.
cannot rule it out.
No,
I'd like to see it.
that would be
Hey,
something.
could you imagine? Oh, and then of course we get to listen to Jim Cornette's viewpoint on it.
Oh
Oh,
my
would that be
goodness.
great? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can only, I don't know if that
oh,
happens.
I get excited just thinking about it. Oh, that'd be great. Love Cornette loves deathmatch wrestling, of course. But I don't blame Jim either because let's be honest, Jim Cornette's hatred for deathmatch wrestling goes back to Ian Rotten,
Yeah.
IWA Mid South, pretty much killing wrestling in Kentucky. I mean, Mid South pretty much killed. They got wrestling kicked out of all the National Guard armories and venues, and Cornette try to do business in Kentucky. So I don't blame Jim for being hot at this, guys.
Well, let's just say this now. if this match happens, we're gonna have to like live podcast this thing or something because I think it would be an absolute spectacle if that
I'm
ever
gonna get Jim
happens.
Cornette on the horn
How about
too.
that? Let's see if we can get Cornette on to he can be our guest commentator. We can do our own like alternate commentary like they used to do on the WWE DVDs and everything. So that could be interesting. So but yes, that was the Nick Gage episode, Dark Side of the Ring. Coming up next, we are going to have the Collision in Korea, which will be this Thursday's episode. That's going to be a fun one, Steve. I sort of said that on the last episode, but that is a story that Bischoff's talked about it on his podcast, and someone who listens to the podcast every week, the 83 weeks with Conrad Thompson. That's probably one of the episodes is probably one of my favorites of Bischoff's, just because I think there's some insight in there that I never really knew about with this whole Collision in Korea thing. But the more you look back at the story, and obviously there's a lot out there you can find on it, but what a unique situation that was. So I'm interested to see who all they have. I mean, certainly I know they'll have Bischoff for that one. I'm interested to see who else kind of is
I
is
believe
on
I
over
saw
that one.
Too Cold Scorpio in the commercial, which
Yeah,
is always nice to hear from Too Cold,
right.
and possibly Scott Flash Norton as well. He's also a good gentleman. So
Because
uh,
Scorpio opened that show, I think, against Benoit. I want to say that was the opening match. I could be
I
wrong.
don't remember.
I'll look
I
that
remember
up.
Flair versus Naoki was on it.
Yeah,
That's about the extent of my. I don't think I ever actually saw the show.
yeah. I don't think I've seen the full show either. I will say that if you search for it, it is available somewhere on the internet. But yeah, that was. I mean, it was just man. I don't know. That was something.
I remember Muhammad Ali was there as well, and I remember Ric Flair mentioning in his book about how him and Ali were like standing there and they were talking to some North Korean guy, and their North Korean guy is doing something. And Ali's all of a sudden like, "No wonder we hate these motherfuckers."
Yeah, like that's. I mean, again, it's yeah, it's going to be a wild one. I have no doubt. Actually, I think let's see. I'm trying to look this up now because it's going to bug me, but I feel like yeah. So it wasn't the opening match. So it was day two. Scorpio and Benoit, who was I guess billed as Wild Pegasus, in that. But yeah, that was for one reason. Some reason that's one of the things I remember. But like you said, the Inoki Flair one is the one that headlined the day two. And I'm sure I'm very interested to see the crowd reported there was whatever it was like 165,000 I think over the 2 days. But
I want to say his report is more. I think his report is like 190,000 or something for like one day. But his report. I'm sure his report is one thing, and who knows what was actually going on there.
actually, no, you're right. I think I had my numbers mixed up. But yes, it was for like a one that so
Like
each like
one
that
day.
was yeah. I was gonna say so each that was the numbers I think that were
If I
somewhere.
remember correctly, there's I believe that audience was not exactly all wrestling fans that were seeking their professional wrestling. I believe those were people that were ordered to be there.
Yeah, that I can only imagine some of the stories that are going to be told in this thing. So, if you've never heard of Collision of Korea, which I'm sure most people listening to this, or if you don't necessarily know the backstory behind it all, it is a fascinating one, and I'm sure there's going to be stuff that come out in this episode that I didn't necessarily know, even with some of the stuff that's been discussed by Bischoff and others. But that's going to be one I'm very intrigued by, just based on the story with that one. But just like we did on the last episode, we will also cover here quickly one of the WWE A&E biographies. And luckily, Steve, this one a little bit, I thought this was certainly better than the one we talked about last time, which was just the brutal.
It wasn't a hit job.
No, it's just
I mean, and let's be honest. I mean, we know Shawn Michaels is a favorite friend of Triple H and the
yeah,
McMahon family, and they didn't shy away from Shawn's problems either.
no,
They pretty much delved into Shawn's issues of drugs and the stuff he got into in the late '90s. They weren't hiding anything here, so I will say that they weren't whitewashing anything. They showed Shawn's warts.
yeah. Well, they showed a lot of stuff, including drugs, and like they did not back away from any of that, and I thought that was overall. I mean, I really enjoyed the Roddy Piper one. Going back and watching that one, I think that was one just Piper's story. I think's always been a fascinating one. But I thought this one probably from start to finish was the best one they've done thus far. Which again, you've had what, four to choose from, five to choose from. Not a ton, but this one felt like to me, even though, and I know you mentioned this before we started recording, but there certainly is, if you're someone like us who knows the story in and out, and you've seen all the documentaries, you've everything over the years, like you pretty much know the stories of all the matches, the backstory behind Shawn and everything. But I think they captured it in a way that, like you said, had they have hidden all the stuff about, him on the painkillers and the, doing the cocaine, and him and Jannetty are just out doing God knows what, at who knows what time in the morning in Vegas and all this other stuff. Had they tried to hide all that stuff, you'd have been like, okay, come on. Like, but they didn't. Like, they went into all of it. And I thought that was, at least, based on some of the hidden stuff that we've seen elsewhere, and could see in some of the upcoming ones. I thought it was really well done, from that aspect. And, Jannetty, I mean, boy, we talk about guys that
Poor bastard.
just like Jannetty, and I wrote this in my notes, like they clearly understood. Look, I mean, Jannetty embraced it, right? Like he was clearly centered here as the party animal drug guy who, they didn't necessarily say that Jannetty's the one that got Shawn into all this, but like he was the focus in that portion of this documentary. So
that poor guy. You almost feel bad for the guy. He certainly has ups and downs over the years, and he. But like they said in the documentary as well, that happens to most great tag teams, where one guy ends up being the better singles guy, and Marty Jannetty there kind of got tossed aside. It was bound to happen. I don't know. Even as a 6-year-old fan at the time when I was watching, The Rock, it was bound to happen. You kind of tell, especially in '92 when they broke up, and you could tell they had plans for Shawn, and they didn't have anything for Marty.
yeah, he just didn't. There was not a lot of direction there, and you just knew that Shawn was.
When you're like a 6 or 7-year-old, you can tell that. Well, okay, they got something for Shawn, but they have nothing for. And when you're like 7 years old, you can tell that. It's pretty obvious, right?
Yeah, Marty's on Wrestling Challenge or Superstars or something. Doing.
Marty
something.
doesn't even have new music.
Yeah.
He's still doing the rocker thing. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Shawn's the one that's going to be doing stuff.
Yeah. Shawn became the guy. I think it's safe to say, for sure. But I mean, they did, and I mean, look, I guess we'll say it though. Like Jannetty even being in this is probably, that's a highlight for Jannetty. There's no doubt, just based on certainly.
Shawn got him a payday.
Yeah, I mean that's good for him, because we've seen the stories over the past however long now with Jannetty, and
he can use it, and he can use all the paydays he can get. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Like you said, you think about how different things could have went, if Shawn's, if it's on the opposite side, or it's just, boy, it's one of those big what ifs that you look back and like, my goodness, who knows what happens there. But we laughed about it on the previous episode. They did not spend a ton of time on the Montreal screw job, which I very much appreciated. And I'm not going to lie, we talked about another laugh I got. Like, I know Vince in some of these is just basically, he hasn't really said a whole lot of substance, I think. But Vince basically just saying, Brett knocked the hell out of him. I'm always going to laugh at that. Just the way he said it.
Which is funny because I've seen, if you go back many years, Vince tried to underplay it first, like how he got knocked. He tried to underplay it. Like I remember one interview he did where he claimed that he actually got hurt by tripping over like Gerald Briscoe's ankle.
Yes.
But no, now he admits that Brett knocked the hell out of him. and God bless Bret Hart, because we know Bret Hart's been through a lot of things, and I've never blamed Bret for being bitter about any of it. But I'm so happy he's gotten to the point where you can tell that he is just so happy whenever he talks about knocking out Vince McMahon.
Oh yeah.
He is just so happy whenever he gets to talk about that.
Yeah, he had a smirk on his face, and I thought, again, that's the first time I've seen Vince like do it in that manner, where he was basically smirking too. He's like, "Yeah, Brett knocked the hell out of me." I appreciated that, and I mean, again, there's certainly a lot you can say about Vince, but I did appreciate that part of it. One of the lines I think that stood out in this was what Triple H said, that what Michaels had told him, that after WrestleMania 10, if he would have just, I guess it was, overdosed on pills or something, he would have been remembered as a legend. If he just would have did that,
Oh wow,
like
yeah,
what a
that was.
line, right?
I had not heard. I don't remember hearing that one before.
That one, I had to write that down. I'm like, I have never heard this before. So that is one that I was like, wow. You think about that, and it's just like, my goodness, like he certainly had his issues. I mean, we know that that's been well
Then he comes
documented.
back in 2002 and he has like a basically a second career.
Yeah, like that's how it went. And I mean, it's just, I mean, this is a guy that we talk about it. There have been so many situations like this, and we talk about dark side of the ring, and I mean, like that's a story that could still be on there. Could have been on there had it gone the wrong way, but like there are a lot of guys who don't necessarily find their way out of those type of situations. But obviously Shawn went into it, basically talking about finding his faith, his wife, like everyone that sort of helped him get through that, and he had another comment that I thought was very interesting too, and just I guess as creative people as we are, but like he said something along the lines of like he didn't feel like he could have like reached the level that he reached like creatively and I guess just in the ring and different type of stuff like without the issues that he had. So I mean that is something too, like I guess to go through everything he had went through to that point and like sort of still to get to that level. It's just such an interesting dynamic too. And I always think about this when they do these documentaries anytime on these legends and guys who went through, the 80s and the 90s and certainly even the early 2000s and such. But it's like that schedule, man, it is just like I can't even fathom. Like if you're someone like that and you're dealing with all these issues, having to go through that schedule, it's just I don't know how some of these guys do it, and I don't know how some of them didn't wind up in much worse shape than maybe they have been just based on the schedule that they had.
And some of them did wind up in much worse shape. I remember back when on the Pillman Dark Side documentary where they talked about how he worked like what 11 days in a row or something,
Yeah,
like leading up to his death there. It's just that was the schedule back then. That's just they went everywhere. They, spreading the good word of professional wrestling, if you will, just all over the place. And it's I don't know if we'll ever see a touring schedule like that again. To be honest with you.
I don't think so either. That's what I was thinking. Is like it's going to be interesting to see what everyone does. Which I know AEW is jumping back into. It seems like WWE will be jumping back around the same time in July, but it's
Yeah, it
like
seems like everybody's going back to fans. You got AEW's going back to fans and WWE and ROH gonna have their show
yeah,
and MLW doing their and it's all kind of in that early July timeframe. You'll see all these people going back to having fans.
yeah. It's like, but how do you? I don't know. Which this discussion we can have probably in another episode,
That's a different podcast.
but
I
it
think that's a
does
different
like tie
podcast for a
into
different website.
yeah, right. But like it ties into like this, like we said, like the stuff with the touring though. It's like I can't even imagine like when you watch stuff like this and you're thinking like if you're a performer, if you're someone and like you watch some of this and you've already kind of been through this grind before, it's like after this past year, like how could you possibly go back to a schedule like that? But I mean it's business, right? And if if it works and it's going to make money, I have no doubt that they will consider going back to a schedule like that, and that grind is just back to the way it was. But I don't know, this Sean one I thought was again not a lot in there that you didn't already know, but I also thought it was pretty well done, and I think it's cool to see like him in NXT doing that kind of stuff. I'm glad they tied in some of that because it does kind of offer that long, I guess, sort of like the long play where it's like, okay, this is where this guy started. You look at him now, he's back there getting all giddy over a spot in a 5-way ladder match at NXT TakeOver. It's like, that's pretty cool, even though this is a guy that had his fair share of problems and was to be blamed for some of those problems. He was not the easiest guy to work with or be around, I'm sure, as you heard from Triple H and others. So I thought it was pretty cool just to see that aspect of him in NXT now and seemingly living his life in a much, much better way.
Yeah, and him and Triple H almost look like the same guy now too.
Yeah, it's true.
It's very strange how they both have the whole beard and bald thing going. It's I mean, if they went back and became a tag team again, they could do the Fabulous One switch.
That's true. That's a good point. Kevin Nash is in this too. Every time I see Kevin Nash in any of these, it's like that is the most laid back dude ever. Like this guy is just like
Yes,
he just doesn't like he doesn't care. He is so laid back and relaxed, and he says anything. And I don't know. Kevin Nash is one of those where it's like,
Well, they said Nash was the smartest guy in pro wrestling for a reason.
yeah, well,
And, and sometimes you don't really, sometimes people get a reputation for being smart in pro wrestling, and you're not really sure whether they deserve it, like a cough, Glenn Jacobs cough. But Kevin Nash is a guy who comes off like one of the smartest guys in wrestling.
yeah, I know people maybe think back to the WCW stuff and the booking and just all that, but I don't know. That guy, there's a documentary, like there's a deep dive into someone like that. And, if that guy ever comes out with a book or something, I'm going to read that one because I feel like he's got a pretty crazy story too. And just, I don't know. I feel like there's so much more in there you want to, to get out of his mind, but probably some stuff you don't want to get out either. So, not unlike anything else. But so that was that one. Shawn Michaels was the most recent one. And coming up next, Steve, it's the one we've been waiting for. The Ultimate Warrior
Oh my
is
gosh, that's
the
gonna
next
it's
one.
gonna be interesting to see which direction they go with that one. I mean, we've seen some whitewashings and we've seen some not so whitewashings, but which way they gonna go with the Warrior this time? I don't know. I mean,
Is this going to be worse or better than the Savage one in terms of the hit job?
well, you see, the thing is, there he did I don't think they can top the self-destruction of the Warrior
Yeah, I don't
because
think
I
so.
think that particular documentary is probably the worst they could do.
Yeah,
I don't
I
think they can top that.
I would agree. I don't think that's gonna be one they can top. And I think they kind of teased it in one of it was a commercial or something that teased the episode. But I mean, they're gonna go into some of
Are
that
they
stuff.
ask Vince about that? 'Cause that would be, if you have Vince as a talking head, that's another one of those things I would ask Vince about.
I want the Vince thing is interesting to me. Like I don't. They've had Vince for all of this, but I don't know that there's really anything to me that's like stood out aside from like I said with the Brett thing and laughing about him knocking him out. But I don't know. I'm very curious how deep maybe he gets into some of these subjects, but he really hasn't. I don't know. He hasn't said a whole lot that really stands out, I guess, thus far. But again, Vince is what 75 now, and
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part. Is there, you kind of wonder, as with the years advance, how much Vince can say that.
yeah,
We might have missed the prime opportunity for Vince McMahon shoot interview.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, boy, if you got Vince unhinged now, I can only imagine what come out of his mouth, with some of this stuff. But
Which could
um,
be, I mean, which could be good. I mean,
yeah,
we've seen some unhinged documentaries do well before, some unhinged shoot interviews. I mean, let's be honest, New Jack was a master at the unhinged shoot interview.
that's true. New Jack, who unfortunately, since our last podcast,
How about that segue? Yeah.
yeah, that's yeah, New Jack passing away. Certainly, go back. There was the Dark Side of the Ring episode on him last season, and man, there's a guy. You talk about a
Very similar in tone to the kind of the Nick Gage
yep. That's what I was about to
documentary for
say.
this.
Yep,
He's kind of Nick Gage of last season, and you can only hope if you watch the Dark Side New Jack episode, you know what I'm talking about. You can only hope that he died while he's in a wheelchair doing coke,
yep.
because that's how he wanted to go out.
That's what he said. That was a. There's so many memorable lines, but like that is always one that's like sticks out. It's like, man, New Jack, he was another one. He was, certainly thoughts are with his family. He was a different cat.
He
But
lived his life, that's for sure,
he
and
did.
he was one of those guys who he did not even bother offering fake apologies because he never felt sorry for anything he ever did.
No, he stuck to his guns to say the least. That is for sure. But I was also thinking we just talked about Vince. What do you think that? And this is again, we'll get into this eventually. But what do you think this Vince Netflix bio series or whatever it's gonna? What do you think that's gonna look like? Like I am so fascinated by that. I have no idea what to expect from it.
I think it's gonna could be completely 100% bullshit.
I think it's a
I'm
pretty high
sorry.
percentage.
I mean, and I'll watch it too, of course, because I watch anything. But any kind of wrestling documentary stuff I'll watch. But I'm sure there's gonna be it's gonna be complete whitewash. 100% Vince was the great alpha mega man of all time, and anybody who thought otherwise is fake news. And it's gonna be stuff that the people like Meltzer or historians will start tearing their hair out. Is what's gonna happen there.
Well, just the one thing to always keep in mind: the headlines when the Vince McMahon Netflix documentary news came out specifically stated produced by WWE. So
Yeah.
there is and Bill Simmons, by the way, who we know.
You know what? Oh, yeah,
I
Bill,
mean,
yeah, him too. There's another one. So you know what you're getting there.
yes.
I don't think anybody's gonna be surprised by that, but
No.
it'll be, you know what? I mean, all you can really ask for is some interesting talking head stuff. I mean, as long as we get some funny stuff, if we get as long as we're entertained, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't expect anything truthful. No.
It's kind of funny. Yeah, I'm sure our podcast on that we'll have a lot of fun with that one. I think there'll be plenty of material to work with. But there you go. There are some thoughts on the most recent episode of Dark Side of the Ring with Nick Gage and the A&E biography on Shawn Michaels. Steve and I will plan to do another one next week. As we said, there will be Collision in Korea on Dark Side of the Ring and the Ultimate Warrior on.
It would have fit. Ultimate Warrior would fit well in North Korea. Actually,
yes, there you go. what a segue that was.
Him and Kim Jong Un would have gotten along very well.
Wow,
I'm sure.
What a segue that was right there. But yes, so that will be our plan. And actually, I guess is the schedule still set to where the Ultimate Warrior Dark Side is going to be the following week? Is that I want to say?
I think so. Yeah.
Well, if that stays the same, we may think of something to where we can maybe tie those all in together.
Yeah, we might want to do the Warrior stuff together.
Yeah, so we may just kind of tie in Collision in Korea in that episode somewhere, but we may just mainly focus on the Warrior stuff.
Unless the demand might be just for Warrior every week. Just keep talking about the Ultimate Warrior.
Maybe we should
keep running that topic in the ground.
Maybe we should start.
Oh, who is a better wrestler, Ultimate Warrior or Luthez? Go.
Oh boy, yeah. Well, that's a discussion right there. So there you go. That's kind of our plans for the documentaries here moving forward. But Steve, before we wrap up, I know you and I are talking here. We're recording this on Tuesday night, and we talked about in the last episode of the podcast. You put together a great column on the late great Larry Csonka, and it is now up over on the site at 411 Mania. So let everybody know where they can find all that, what you did with that, and anything else you have coming up over there.
Yeah, and it was I thought it was a fitting. It was good, and I think the people enjoyed it. And I hear that Larry's GoFundMe got some extra donations today, which is great. So always good to keep doing that, and we'll keep linking that whenever we can. Definitely because Larry Csonka had a huge effect on everybody here at 411mania.com. He was the backbone of the site for many, many years. And the further we keep going on into the future, like I said, I try every time to try to live up to Larry's standards. And I don't think I do it very often, but I try. It's all about the effort, quite honestly. And I think everybody else here at 411, who quite frankly doesn't do a much better job living up to the standards. I know Blake's come on board, and Blake's done a great job this past year. And he's picked up some of the stuff that Larry would have done back in the past. And I think Blake, he does a good job. I'm putting him over. I'm trying to put you over here, kid. It's all right, but I know Blake does a good job, and Tony Acero, who does great stuff with Raw. Ian Hamilton, I want to give a shout out to Ian because he's kind of picked up kind of the torch for Larry as far as doing some of the lesser known shows, some of those indie shows that Larry would review some of the smaller shows, and I know he'd be happy that Ian's kind of keeping that going for 411 because I thought kind of what that might have gone away, but Ian's picked that up. So shout out to him and to everybody at 411, keeping it going, and that's what we'll keep trying to do for Larry Csonka.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the kind words, but like you said, one of the comments on the article you had on the site was, and someone put it as I couldn't put it as eloquently as they did, but it's like they were right, and there's like, it's basically you have different people covering different things now because there is no one like Larry. Like not everyone can do everything that he did. Just the ultimate workhorse in terms of everything that he did, and like you said, just I know a lot of people at the site, and us included, are doing our best to continue the tradition along here, and so hopefully everyone reads that column. Like you said, a lot of great feedback on it, and I think it brought back a lot of memories for people, and I'm sure lots of people going back and checking out the previous columns from Larry's, even the ones that weren't mentioned. Like you said, you can only add so many in a top 7.
I have 7 spots on that damn
right?
on that damn countdown.
Yep.
But I'll be honest, I'll ask you, like, Do you think Larry might have also kind of thought that these AEW Dark and Dark Elevation shows were a little too long?
I do believe
You,
that.
you think Larry might have been kind of like, come on now, guys, let's shorten up a little bit?
I think he would probably, with me, I try to stay optimistic for people who read the regular AEW Dark reviews that I do every week. I've tried to stay optimistic with all this, but as Steve and I talked about, I can't say I'm probably going to be too necessarily upset once the live touring begins again, because I don't think they'll be doing between Dark and Dark Elevation, probably 30 something matches combined with those two. I understand the value of it. It's great for those who need experience, but I do think it's
It's like Lawrence of Arabia every week here.
yeah. If I had to be the one to review both shows back to back, like we said, and Larry was someone who would watch everything.
Larry would have had to do that. Let's be
Exactly, and
honest.
that's what I was gonna say.
He would have
He
been the
would have
one
been
doing.
doing it. Yes. I don't. Again, that's one of the reasons why I will never be as good as he was because I just don't think I could do it. So yes. Hopefully that format gets worked out a little bit better in the future there for the AEW Dark shows. But yes, check out the column 41mania.com. You can find it in our column section. Steve's column on Larry, and as he said, the GoFundMe still active. We will put that in the show notes of this episode as we do for all the episodes. So be sure to continue to share and donate if you can. Everything else, 41mania.com. We actually, as Steve and I are recording here, we just had our Wednesday column go up on the WWE releases. We did a big roundtable with some of the writers on the site, given our favorite landing spots potentially for the big WWE releases that happened about a month ago now. Samoa Joe, Billy Kay, Peyton Royce, all of those. We've got thoughts on that in there, so check that out on the site, 41mania.com. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, any podcast app you use. You can find it there. And yeah, thanks as always for listening to the podcast. And we'll talk to you next time here on the 411 on Wrestling Podcast.